So 3 years ago, I started building this wood shop, and I've bought some great tools. I've bought some tools that have just sat on a shelf and only been used a couple of times. And I've bought a couple of tools that were just basically money wasters. If I could go back in time and talk to Damien from 3 years ago, what would I tell him? What tools, now that I have the benefit of hindsight, what tools would I still get? What would be at the top of my list? And what would I avoid? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's dive right in. So my best friend likes to joke around and say that woodworking is nothing more than cutting wood apart and putting it back together. While it's slightly more complicated than that, I do like the elegant simplicity of that explanation. So let's talk about the first most important tool that you can have in your shop, something to cut wood apart. And you have several choices. You've got your miter saw. You've got a track saw or a circular saw. You've got your skill saw or jigsaw, and you've got your table saw. And for me, the number one tool to have in your shop is going to be a table saw. What I love about the table saw is that it's incredibly versatile. It can be used for breaking down plywood, ripping wood, cross-cutting wood, and you can create a variety of different types of jigs for use in the table saw to make it the most versatile tool in your entire shop. Now, my table saw of choice, the one that I use in my shop, is this DeWalt 7485. I'll put a link down in the description below. Now, this is only an 8¼ inch table saw, but I've had it for a little over 3 years and I've put it through its paces. And this has been the most valuable tool in my shop without question. The strength of the table saw is how versatile it is, in that you can actually create a variety of different types of jigs to accomplish so many tasks. So if you're just getting started, first and foremost, the first piece of power equipment that I recommend that you buy is a table saw. This one right here runs around $350 right now, so it's relatively easy to get into. And what I like about it most is that it does have really good resale value. So if I ever do get to the point where I'm ready to upgrade and get a bigger one, this would be relatively easy to sell in a very short period. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that it is only an 8¼ inch blade instead of a full-size 10-inch blade. So you're going to lose a little bit there, but you can do a lot of great work with a job site table saw just like this. Number 2 on my list of must-have tools for any new woodworker is proper dust collection. Now, for the first couple of years in my shop, I just managed to get by with this DeWalt shop vac with a cyclone attachment, and it's done a fine job. So if you're just getting started, this is a good alternative. Now, the way that it works is that all of the debris is collected right in through here. The cyclone action keeps most of the large particles right in here, and they drop down into the bucket, and very little actual sawdust makes it into your shop vac. So if you're getting started, this is a good starting point. But I do recommend, as your shop grows and you start working with larger projects, you start getting things like jointers and planers, which do put out a lot of dust. I do recommend that you consider upgrading to a better dust collection system, which I'm actually in the process of doing. I've actually got it in a box right over there, and I can't wait until it's online. Now, you will note that I've got this handy dandy cart that I built just out of some scrap lumber. It's about ready for the burn pile as well. But in a pinch, this has actually done a pretty good job sustaining me so far. But as you can see, with all the dust around, I really need to get that upgrade finished, and that's what we're in the process of doing. Next on the list is a good drill and driver set. Not only is it cool, they come in really handy, and it's a good idea to have both. The reason being is because there's nothing more inconvenient than having to take the drill bit out of your drill and then put your Phillips head in there and keep on switching back and forth. So having a good drill and driver set is worth its weight in gold. Once again, I am a fan of DeWalt. They've got great tools, so these are the ones that I picked up. And again, I'll put a link down in the description. Now, next up, we have the trim router or the palm router. A router is an incredibly useful tool to have in your shop. You put whatever style of bit that you want inside of there, and you can create roundovers, you can create chamfers, you can create rabbets and dados. You can get a keyhole bit so that you can put a hole in a groove in the back so that you can mount your pieces to the wall. Now, when it comes to router bits, this is one of the few situations where I say buy something cheap. Get yourself a good set with a wide variety of different bits, and then you'll find that the ones that wear out, that the paint starts chipping, those are the ones that you end up using the most. So those are the ones that you might go back and buy a better quality version of, and then the rest of these are just kind of oddball bits that are there on the rare occasion that you ever need them. And you can also upgrade to a plunge router if you need to, and then also a router table. Now, this particular router table I bought a couple of years ago, and I don't really use it that much. The big reason is because once you mount this plunge router underneath, it's kind of hard to adjust. It's not the most user-friendly in the world. It's not a bad piece of equipment, but if I could go back and get rid of this one, I would, and put the extra money into buying a Craig router insert. I've actually already bought one of those. I just haven't got the table built and haven't gotten it created yet. But a router, especially a palm router, is a very handy thing to have. Now, you can also get them in the cordless variety, which I kind of recommend because the cords just tend to get in the way. So if you have a little bit extra in your budget, then spring for the cordless variety. And number 5 on the list is get yourself a good sander. Now, this is a simple Black & Decker that I've had for years. I actually bought this before I even started my wood shop, and it's done the trick, but I am in the market for looking for an upgrade because as the projects that I've created have gotten bigger, this one has a tendency to put my hand to sleep, so I'm on the lookout for some recommendations there. So for any of you experienced woodworkers, if you have recommendations about a random orbit sander that you like, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Now, in terms of sandpaper, you're going to need to get 60 to 80 grit, 120 and 220. I very seldom find the need to go further than that, and that will do the trick. So far as brands, I just get what they have at Lowe's. I tend to get the cheap stuff, but a lot of people prefer some better brands than what I get, so I'm not going to make a recommendation on that. Now, it's also a good idea to consider a spindle sander. I bought a spindle sander, and so I'm going to call that kind of a 5B. I bought a spindle sander a couple of years ago, and I probably use it just as much, if not more, as the random orbit sander because so many of the projects that I create are smaller types of projects, clocks, charcuterie boards, cutting boards, that type of thing. And so that spindle sander is a godsend there as well. All right, now let's talk about some of those tools that are handy to have, but you may not need them at the jump. And one of them is going to be the miter saw. I love my miter saw. I use it so much, and it's a very handy tool to have. And I do recommend you get one, but it's not necessarily the type of tool that you've got to get right now. Almost anything that can be done on a miter saw can be done on the table saw, as I've already mentioned. So while this miter saw is a great tool to have, and I'm glad that I bought it, it's not something that you have to get right there from the start. A couple of other tools that I would put on the down the road, but they're good to have, are a planer and a jointer. I went almost 3 years without a jointer, and I actually did a pretty good job without one because you can use a table saw, you can use a track saw. There are different ways that you can joint boards without a jointer, but I finally got to a point where I decided to go ahead and pull the trigger on one, and I'm glad that I did. Now, a planer, if you're going to be dealing with wood that is rough lumber that you're going to have to surface yourself, you definitely want to have a planer. But if you're just getting started, you can do without a planer because you can buy surfaced wood. So that's going to save you some money, but I would actually put the planer as maybe number 6 on that top 5 list. And even though you don't have to have one to get started with, it would definitely be one of the first purchases that I would make when you have the money. All right, so now let's talk about a couple of tools that I might have put off or not bought in hindsight. One is this biscuit joiner. Now, it's handy for laying out boards and making sure you have a flat surface, but I've probably only used this particular tool twice. It's a handy tool, and when you need it, it's good to have it, but I've only used it a couple of times, and so it's kind of money wasted. Whenever I do need it, I'm glad I have it, but this is probably the type of thing that I would just borrow from a friend if I ever needed it. And the track saw is another one that it's a handy tool to have, but I don't use it as much as I thought that I would. I mainly use it for breaking down plywood because even though my table saw can do it, cutting a 4x8 sheet of plywood on a table saw can be a challenge. So I prefer to use my track saw for that. So this is a handy tool to have, but it's kind of one of those that maybe you can put off and you can do without. All right, so I hope you got something useful out of this. If you did, feel free to hit that subscribe button below. That channel growth really helps me out and it doesn't cost you a thing. And since you're still here, make sure you check out this video right here, which is a review of my Wahuda benchtop jointer that I recently purchased.